So I'll be speaking about managing and recovering disasters, the CARILEC framework. The presentation would cover these following topics: a brief overview of CARILEC, what it is for those who may not be familiar with the association; our disaster assistance program, which is based on mutual support, mutual assistance of our members; a CDAP expansion program that we launched a couple years ago, an annual line workers symposium and rodeo that we have to build capacity as it relates to disaster response preparedness. And also underline all of this is our multi-sectoral approach to resilience. I'll give an example of some of the initiatives we're undertaking in this regard. And further to that, the development of an emergency response strategy and action plan that we developed recently called URSAP for the energy sector. And finally, an initiative that we are putting forward for implementation during the course of this year, hopefully, with possibilities of funding from various development partners that we'll be discussing on this, and pool procurement and central warehousing, preposition of materials with the OECS Commission for the Eastern Caribbean, Trinidad, and Barbados. So that's an overview or preview of the presentation. I may skip through some parts quickly in the interest of time and make the slides available to all of the participants and panelists for your further review and perusal and any follow-up questions, networking, follow-up collaboration that might be useful. So here we go. CARILEC is the Caribbean Regional Association of Electric Utilities. The main services that we offer are listed on the screen: training and development, both face-to-face and online through a portal that does webinars and other networking capacity building events. So we do knowledge sharing through conferences, technical studies. So we do a quarterly tariff survey of our electric utility members that is published quarterly. We also recently launched the automated benchmarking platform with about 66 KPIs to measure the performance of our electric utilities in transitioning, and a wide array of other KPIs. And that is a web-based distributed system that our member utilities, 20 of the member utilities, are part of that benchmarking platform that is web-based and deployed across the members in the region. The disaster assistance program will be the focus of our presentation today. We also offer business development for our associate members. So the structure of CARILEC is that, as you'll see in the next slide, we have both utility members and associate members who are companies who do business with our utility members, fuel providers, equipment providers, etc. And they would receive as a benefit for membership business development opportunities across the network. And advocacy, we play a strong role in advocating for legislative reform, adoption of regulations to facilitate the smooth energy transitioning through various regulatory roundtables, position papers, and meetings with key policymakers across the region. So that's what we do. Our member utilities operate in the following jurisdictions you see up on the screen now. And basically our values would the preeminent value would be collaboration, because we do extensive networking across the region and beyond, innovation and agility, and the other two that are listed on the screen. So the second area I would speak briefly about is CDAP. And again, I won't read through all of the words on all of the slides. These will be more for reference takeaway. But basically, the way the CDAP works, the Disaster Assistance Program on Mutual Assistance, is that member utilities would make annual contributions to a fund that the Secretariat manages and coordinates the deployment of manpower assistance post-disaster. That would be the role of the CARILEC Secretariat, headquartered in St. Lucia. And we would normally do this, if necessary, deploying engineers to undertake damage assessments in the first instance to scope the nature of the response that's required, and coordinate the support from our member utilities across the region to ramp up the support given to a utility that is disaster-stricken from a hurricane, earthquake, volcanic eruption, what have you, as has been the case over the years. So the utility receiving assistance will be responsible for providing accommodation, meals, and ground transportation. And the utilities providing assistance would cover the cost, the manpower cost of the personnel deployed. So that would greatly ease at the time of disaster when the utility, whether it's government owned or investor owned, would be most vulnerable, would not have a major outflow of expenditure to ramp up that manpower support. So the roles and responsibilities of the various parties are listed on the following slides. I wouldn't run through all of that, but just so that you understand the structure of the program and how it works, what the Secretariat is responsible for is listed on this slide, and what the utility members are responsible for are listed on the following two slides. As I said, more related to the logistics on the ground, ensuring that their own disaster management plans are up to date and operational, because what we do is not direct country support per se. As a secretariat, as an association, we collaborate and ramp up support at the regional level, pooling capacity. But each utility and each country obviously would have the disaster management and response protocols, and we encourage all utilities to have up-to-date comprehensive disaster management plans in place, so that when they get the incoming country support from member utilities, everything would fall neatly into place in a structure that is seamless for receiving such support externally. So the role of the assistant utility is given here on the screen, to meet the cost of wages for the crews deployed, etc. So just an example now of some deployments over the last 2 decades up on the screen from 2000, 2009. You'd see some familiar names of those who are familiar with the weather systems that have passed through the region and made an impact. Ivan in 2004, Ike in 2008, and you see the severity of impacts to electricity infrastructure on the screen, the average duration of manpower assistance in weeks that CARILEC coordinated, the number of line workers deployed, etc. So as recently as 2019, Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas was the deployment. Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017 were quite noteworthy in terms of the impact and the level of manpower support coordinated through the CARILEC network and deployed to assist member utilities to have a speedy restoration of electricity supply in their respective jurisdictions. So thirdly, we launched an expansion program. Basically, the thinking was that in the context of COVID, we recognized that inter-island travel was particularly difficult. There were lots of protocols, restrictions of travel, and we dreaded the thought of a hurricane striking in the midst of COVID. That would have been utter disaster in terms of ramping up support, in terms of mobility and the engagement and interaction that you need. And we all know what was the protocol like in COVID times, the lockdowns and the social distancing, etc. So we launched a program to build capacity at the country level to sort of minimize the need for cross-border travel in terms of ramping up utility support. So the expansion project of CDAP was really to expand capacity at the national level and to bring in more into play the contractors, line worker contractors, not just the utilities, but line worker contractors to build capacity for response capability post-disaster. So we conducted virtual training, in-country training, again, to minimize the travel across border in a COVID, post-COVID scenario, and basically to ramp up the capacity by way of a reserve core, we call it, of line workers to supplement the capacity that would be available within electric utility members. So we trained personnel across 13 Caribbean territories, and the agreement was that contractors would release these reserve line workers as it were, when assistance is needed post-disaster for an agreed period in compensation for the training, which was provided free of cost, free of any fee to those contracting firms. So it was a mutual exchange for building capacity, we're helping you so that you could help us as a collective, not just CARILEC, but obviously the member countries that our utility members operate in. We also, as I said, undertake an annual event basically to build capacity. It's really a fun event. It's called a Line Worker Symposium, which is capacity building and rodeo. So they are competitive activities, speed pole climbing, undertaken under prescribed control conditions, maximizing safety. And you see here, by way of participation across our network, pre-COVID as it were and post-COVID, we actually saw a tremendous growth in the activity upon its return after COVID in 2023. So we have teams from various member utilities that take part in a day-long activity of pole climbing, herdsman rescue, transformer change out on poles, etc. And there's an award ceremony, etc., judging, etc., for that rodeo event. So it's really, and that normally happens just before the onset of the hurricane season. We normally have this event in April as a way to sharpen the skill sets of the frontline responders in a post-disaster scenario. So we do that in April. We have a disaster coordinators roundtable as well in April in preparation for the hurricane season, which of course begins on June 1st. So just some pictures from rodeo, for example. This is a fun but skill-building activity. We have basketball on the poles. So line workers would, in a time basis, be judged on the number of accurate passes and catches to their colleagues across the pole. On the left-hand side, you see a herdsman rescue operation, and these are judged, and we have exhibitors and so on who take part in the event. As I said before, one of the foundational concepts for our view of resilience is that it needs to be multi-sectoral. We are dealing with a multi-hazard environment. So we're talking about hurricanes, floods, volcanic eruption. We had COVID at the time, and we said we are in a multi-hazard environment that calls for a multi-sectoral and a multi-layered response. The multi-layered aspect is not shown on the screen, but what we mean by multi-sectoral is we're saying that to build resilience in the energy sector, we have to build resilience across all the related sectors because there is a synergy between electricity, water, and telecoms. So for example, if you talk about the smart grid for the electricity sector, you're talking about telecoms. If you're talking about hydropower generation, you're talking about water resources. And also conversely, for many of our islands, for water to get to homes, they need electricity. So when the grid is down, persons don't get water. So there is an interconnection between these sectors. And so resilience cannot be just at a narrow sectoral level. So we collaborate extensively with CAWASA, which is the Caribbean Water and Sewage Association, CANTO, the Association of National more recently, obviously, the onset of COVID, as we said. So we appreciate that it needs to be multi-sectoral and also multi-layered, meaning that resilience cannot be built only at the institutional level or the organizational level. It has to be at the national level. It has to be also at the household level, the community level, and the individual level. So resilience as a concept is really multi-layered. So by way of an example, if we have a household that is not resilient in a sense and adversely impacted by a disaster, and you happen to have a key responder in that household, a line worker who doesn't have a roof, and his family is in grave jeopardy, how do you get him to focus on coming out and restoring the grid, climbing poles and changing out transformers, and his family doesn't have a roof over their head? So the concept of resilience has to be at all levels so that our personnel could build resilience at the individual, household, community level, so they're better placed and in a better mindset to understand and respond to the concept of resilience at the organizational and national level. Likewise, at the national level, we had that instance in the Bahamas where we had an investor-owned utility who was literally saying, look, we could expend a few $1 million. We have a network in Canada. It's an investor-owned utility, and we could restore the grid in a matter of 3 to 4 weeks. But the entire island is decimated. So what's the point? When I bring back the grid at that cost, who's there to uptake the energy that we're providing? So again, resilience in terms of building codes, building standards, enhancing resilience of the off-takers of electricity supply must also be a priority. So resiliency of the energy sector, who's supplying the rest of the country, the businesses and the household, is a moot concept if the rest of the country isn't also resilient. Because who are you going to supply electricity to if everything is decimated, destroyed after a disaster? So we are saying that resilience has to be multi-sectoral and multi-layered for it to make any sense in a social, economic construct for development purposes. It cannot just be at a sectoral view and not looking at the interconnection. So that we use that concept and we have these sort of gatherings. For example, you see on the screen, we convene a major disaster and risk management virtual symposium where we branded it. CARILEC took the lead on that, creating connections, strengthening communities. And we emphasize in that forum, and we've been doing since then, the roles and responsibilities of CDEMA, COASA, CANTO, and CARILEC in supporting rehabilitation, response, and recovery. So that has been the fundamental approach to resilience from CARILEC's perspective, is that we can't do it alone as a sector. We have to look at it from a multi-sectoral standpoint. Penultimately, we also on that basis launch a comprehensive initiative where we call it ERSAP, Emergency Response Strategy and Action Plan for the energy sector, but again, for the energy sector, but not only involving the energy sector. So aligning with the Integrated Resource and Resiliency Planning that's being undertaken by CARICOM and CCRI, the ERSAP was developed to address the need for short-term mechanisms to support countries and utilities with energy emergencies. So again, I'll not read through all the words on the following slides, but it describes what the ERSAP covered, quite comprehensive report identifying gaps and challenges to provide a management operational structure across the regional and national agencies, overview of relevant national and regional emergency response mechanisms. So we have a comprehensive report describing these protocols, communication chains with firm recommendations as what should be done on a cross-sectoral basis to increase resilience in the Caribbean region. And cross-sectoral, I'm talking about, obviously, like we said, disaster management agencies at the regional and national level, water, telecoms, etc. And finally, as I close the presentation, just to point to the future, we're looking at further strengthening the CDAP by including materials and logistical support in addition to manpower coordination and deployment. So we conducted a survey late last year that we had 22 responses across 14 of our utility members who agreed that pool procurement and regional stockpiling was a high priority. And so we're looking for to discuss with our development partners, the World Bank included, hint, hint, of a project, a pilot project proposal that could look at the Eastern Caribbean, Trinidad and Barbados, in terms of an initiative that would look at regional stockpiling, pre-positioning of equipment and materials to increase the efficiency, combat the challenges of the supply chain that we heard in previous presentations. And so the number one areas are listed on the screen: poles, T&D cables, joints and accessories, tools and equipment for the grid restoration, and insulators and capacitors for circuit breakers would be the items that the utilities are saying that be useful for warehousing and pre-positioning to improve the efficiency of response to a natural disaster. So that's the way forward to supplement the manpower assistance framework with the regional stockpiling, pre-positioning, and deployment of materials and manpower in a more efficient basis. And so we're looking to work this pilot initiative with the OECS Commission. With whom I should say we have an established memorandum of understanding signed as of November last year between CARILEC and the OECS Commission. We also have an MOU with CCRI, and we are renewing our MOU with the CARICOM Community Secretariat. So we have these strong alliances across the region that we're looking to leverage to increase resilience accordingly. And finally, sticks in a bundle and breakable is the motto and theme for our approach to disaster resilience. I thank you for your time and look forward to questions and further discussion. Thank you.